Welcome to Free Speech TV. I'm Carl Nagin, correspondent here, and with me today is John Lanier. John Lanier is executive director of the Ray C. Anderson Foundation, which was named after his grandfather, a man who has been called the greatest green industrialist of the century. His story is inspiring, and John is going to tell us a little bit about it. Anderson was the founder of Interface Inc., a highly successful carpet manufacturing enterprise that he transformed into a sustainable, climate-neutral business. In 1994, Anderson set a zero carbon footprint goal for his company. His story gives us some insight into how sustainability can be smart business. And here to tell us about Ray Anderson and his ongoing legacy is John Lanier. Thank you, John, for being with us, and welcome to Free Speech TV.
Thank you, Carl.
Tell me a little bit about Ray's story.
Happily.
Good.
One of my favorite stories to tell, really. It's been such a big part of my life. He wasn't just my grandfather. He is the reason I get to do what I do each and every day, and I'm so grateful for that. So Ray, as you mentioned, he was an entrepreneur. He started Interface, this carpet tile company, in 1973, and grew the business, scratched and clawed as a young entrepreneur, as so many do. Took it public in 1983, and for many entrepreneurs, that's the moment you've made it. And he probably would have said the same thing back then. You mentioned 1994 as a turning point for him. It absolutely was. That was a year where the company started to wrestle with a question. What is Interface doing for the environment? And it was a question that was bubbling up from customers. The sales team didn't have a good answer to that question. And so they looked to corporate headquarters, who turned to Ray for guidance on what Interface's environmental vision could be. They pulled together a task force of about 20, 25 people around the company to work on answering that question. And they said, Ray, give us your kickoff speech to this task force. And it was the first time he didn't know what to say to his company because he would have admitted he didn't have an environmental vision. But fortunately, fate intervened, and a book landed on his desk a couple of weeks before this talk that he was dreading. The Ecology of Commerce was that book, written by Paul Hawken.
Right.
And the book theorized that business and industry is the greatest culprit in terms of the decline of the biosphere and all environmental harm that we're seeing, primarily as a result of the take, make, waste, linear industrial manufacturing model. But it also said that business and industry is the only sector large enough, well enough organized and capitalized to take a leadership role in getting the world out of the mess that we've created. So Ray read this book. He read it straight through in one night. It was a deeply emotional experience for him. It was a mirror that was held up to his face, where before he'd only seen a great thing that he had done, creating this company that was putting a beautiful, high-quality product on the floor, employing thousands of people, providing a livelihood for them and their families. What a wonderful story. Well, now it has a dark side that Ray saw for the first time, that his company was harming the planet that those families lived on and that their children would come to inherit. So he had his environmental vision, his epiphany in that moment, and he shamelessly plagiarized from Paul Hawken and his work in that kickoff speech that he gave. Paul didn't mind. They became very good friends, and Paul was instrumental in helping Interface shift their business model in the years that followed. What they realized is that Interface had to prove the way on sustainability because there was no other company at the time that was really taking a leading role that they could follow. So they had to go and lead. He proved that when done right, sustainability can be good for the bottom line. And he was a fierce capitalist. He wanted to go and make every sale of carpet he possibly could. But he saw the moral component too, and that's really what convicted him to do this work. So he changed the culture at Interface, brought people along with him in this vision, and all of a sudden you had thousands of people and their families who were working with him to transform this carpet tile manufacturing company.
I've heard him refer to himself as a reformed plunderer.
Yes. He liked to say that the book was his spear in the chest moment when Paul convicted him as a plunderer of the earth. And so he had been a recovering plunderer.
What was it about his character that enabled him to have that kind of self-reflective insight? I mean, there must have been a strong moral, spiritual side to him.
Absolutely. He was a person of faith and understood that his obligation in life was to more than just himself and his own betterment and his own honorifics. He has 2 daughters, and my mother and my aunts, he loved them so very much and wanted to make sure that they were taken care of, that I was taken care of, along with my 2 brothers and my 2 cousins, his 5 grandchildren. And beyond that, generations and generations of people to come. His North Star, as he transitioned his company, was something called Tomorrow's Child, the name of a poem written by one of his employees who heard him speak in the early years. And it's that representation of the generations of people not yet on this planet, but who are coming, and to whom we have a real deep moral obligation.
That's extraordinary. So he set a goal for the company, zero carbon.
Zero everything. I mean, to have no negative impact on the environment.
By 2020.
By 2020.
How far along are you?
The company is still climbing Mount Sustainability. The peak at which is that zero footprint. They've come a really long way. It's hard to put a percentage on it because the measurements are challenging. But the company believes that they will get there and be able to declare the mission a success. We're talking about there are 7 fronts to Mount Sustainability. That they recognize that you can't do one thing well and claim to be sustainable. You have to attack the challenges of how we shift our models holistically. So, Interface, to be sustainable, must have zero waste. It must be powered entirely by renewable energy. It must have completely benign emissions. It must close the manufacturing loop such that old carpet can be turned into new carpet entirely. That's the circular economy model that is largely talked about today. You have to have 5th, resource-efficient transportation of your people and your product around the globe. 6th, you have to sensitize stakeholders. That means looking upstream to your supply chain and downstream to your customer base and shift those 2 segments along with you. And then finally, 7th is redesign commerce itself, because we have so many structures built into our economic systems that incentivize corner cutting, that incentivize us to do the wrong thing, to save a little bit of money. We have to change the way that commerce itself operates such that the incentives are flipped towards racing to the top, bettering our models, competing in the right ways as opposed to racing to the bottom and competing
And you've
wrong.
demonstrated that you can do this
The company
and
has in
maintain
so many respects.
profitability.
Especially because of that first front, zero waste. It turns out waste is expensive. And if you can have less of it, you're gonna save money. You increase efficiencies in your operations. That saves you money. You reduce the amount of raw materials that you require in the first place. That saves you money. And that can finance all of the expensive parts of going green without even accounting for the goodwill benefits that come from having a workforce more loyal to the purpose of your company, that come along with having a customer base willing to pay a little bit more if necessary for the right product.
This is interesting because you're doing this in a climate, corporate climate, and I think also political climate that is so focused on short-term thinking and not long-term thinking. So, as you've demonstrated this, have you been able to reach out and to convince other businesses? Are they interested in what you're doing and this circular model that you're describing?
For so many companies, Interface has been a model for how to do this the right way. Ray had so many friendships with other business leaders who said, can you help us? Can you teach us what you've done and how to take this process forward?
This is after they said, you must be out of your...
Yes, naturally. He had to prove he wasn't crazy first. But he did that, and then all of a sudden, he was a credible source, a credible model for improvement in ways that just made good sense, that were so right, so smart, to use his phrase. So companies, including Unilever and Walmart, have looked to Interface as an example in their own journeys towards becoming more sustainable.
So let's talk a little bit about Ray's legacy. Tell me, he died in 2011.
Yes.
And he was involved with Bioneers, was he not?
He was.
That?
He spoke, I
tell us about this.
believe twice, and was, as I understand it, I didn't get to see him in action here. I've seen the videos, but as I understand it, he was a crowd hit.
Yeah.
He was world renowned for what he did, but in particular, I think being here at Bioneers amongst people who get it, that's where he felt at home. He didn't mind preaching to the choir every now and again.
Right.
Turns out that you can do a lot of good
How
things.
did that
preaching
happen, the relationship with Bioneers? Through Paul Hawken?
Yeah,
or?
it may very well have been. I don't know exactly who reached out, who made the connection, who made it happen.
But you still have a relation with Paul. He's on
Yes.
one of your boards.
Yes. So Paul has graciously served as one of our advisory board members, along with some of the other inspirations to Ray as he set out to transform interface in that model. And we're the family foundation. So I work for the foundation that he left his estate to. And we've been so
Tell
humbled
us some
at
of
the
your work.
relationships.
Sorry.
Sure, yeah. The years since Ray passed away, and he didn't tell us that this foundation was coming. He didn't tell us what to do with it once it arrived.
Oh my.
It's really been a wonderful surprise to us as a family and an opportunity with a blank slate to do what we think is right. And what we think is right is to build upon his legacy. He was so well known as this environmental champion, this hero, and we're not worthy to step into those shoes and move forwards, and no one of us can. But as a family, I think we can do a lot of good and keep his story alive, keep telling new chapters of the story that he began writing.
And so part of that is the Center for Sustainable Business. Can you
Yes.
describe some of the things that programs that you have?
That is the first long-term funding commitment that we made. Ray was a proud graduate of Georgia Tech. I grew up going to football and basketball games with my daddy Ray, and we would cheer on the Yellow Jackets. For such a high-quality academic institution, it was a natural fit for us to make a grant there. So we have funded the Ray C. Anderson Center for Sustainable Business in the Scheller College of Business at Georgia Tech. So it's the place where we hope the Ray Andersons of tomorrow can be educated. Young people committed to making a career in business and industry, but people who understand from the very beginning that business not only has to shift towards sustainability, but there are opportunities for the business world to improve when integrating sustainable thinking throughout the entire model. We want those students to be empowered from the get-go at the beginning of their careers. So it's been a great partnership that we've had with Georgia Tech.
Terrific. And also the Drawdown Project, that's a Paul Hawken project.
We have supported Project Drawdown. I also serve on the board of directors of that organization, and we've loved that partnership because Paul asked a question that needed answering, and that's what Project Drawdown has been doing. The question is, what technologies, practices, things that humanity can and is doing to lighten our carbon footprints, to in part reverse global warming, slow it down at the very least, but with a goal towards reversing it. Which of those things that we can do would actually do the most if scaled globally? What would you guess is more impactful between scaling LED lighting or electric vehicles or reforestation efforts or rotational grazing of our agricultural lands or educating women in the developing world, therefore reducing birth rates? Until somebody does the math, we can't know which of those are most impactful. So that's what Project Drawdown did. It's a book. It's a research project and now a book that was published in April of this year.
Terrific.
And the lessons learned from that book are amazing, and they include the fact that we can do this. Global warming is reversible. We have the technologies. We have what we need. We just have to get to work on scaling them. And it shows that the sectors that we think have been the biggest problems, in many respects that's true, but the opportunities in other sectors are more so than we anticipated. Most people think that renewable energy is the key to reversing global warming. It's not the largest sector. Food. There are more opportunities from reducing carbon dioxide equivalent in our atmosphere by pulling it down or preventing it from being emitted in the first place in the food sector than in energy. Energy is number 2, and land use is right up there as well as a sector. But who's talking about that? Who's saying that we have to really get to work on changing our food systems if we want to reverse global warming?
This would be the food manufacturing cycle, the trucking, the long distance trucking,
all
every
of it.
piece of that.
It's the number 3 technology in the book in terms of potential to reduce gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent in the atmosphere from 2020 to 2050. I know that was wordy, that was a mouthful, but the reversal potential, the number 3 technology is reducing food waste. And that's because all of the energy spent keeping food cold from field eventually to plate, if that food gets wasted, that energy was wasted. not to mention food waste then will go through a process of breaking down, releasing methane. So food waste is a massive challenge and opportunity from a climate standpoint. It also has so many benefits in terms of feeding humanity.
Yes.
There are so many reasons we should be working to reverse global warming that have nothing to do with global warming. It just means creating a better world.
So this is a paradigm shift in our thinking about
It is.
as well.
It has turned the climate narrative on its head, and we so desperately need it. People will tell you that doom and gloom, we're all going to die, climate change is going to ruin humanity. Reject that. We can do this. We can reverse it, and when we do, we will have created the best version of humanity that's ever existed. A version of humanity with low energy costs accessible to all people, with healthy functioning food systems that are more localized, with ultra efficient cities that actually build up community rather than detract from it. It's the world I want my child to live in. I don't just want to avert catastrophe in the work that I do. I actually want to create something better, and that's what this book is showing the way.
Well, it sounds like you're doing that, John. Thank you very much. Is there anything else you want to tell us about your work?
I should share one last project that we
Please
are excited about called the Ray, and this is something close to home for us. There's a stretch of interstate in Georgia called the Ray C. Anderson Memorial Highway. We were honored to have the Georgia legislature name this stretch of highway after my grandfather. It connects West Point, Georgia, right on the border of Alabama, which is where Ray was born. And 18 miles down the road is LaGrange, Georgia, which is where he founded Interface. So it's a natural fit for this road. But it was my aunt, who's one of the trustees for the Ray C. Anderson Foundation, Harriet Langford, who said after that road was named that we just named a dirty highway after the greenest industrialist. I don't think Daddy would like this. And so we have created a new nonprofit that we support that is called The Ray, and it's focused on making this 18-mile stretch of interstate the prototypical highway of the future, a sustainable, if not regenerative highway that brings technologies together, the technologies that could innovate and make our transportation systems work, such that this highway can show the potential to generate electricity renewably, to use more renewable materials, to filter stormwater, to protect wildlife, to protect human life. You don't have a very sustainable highway if people are dying on it. And to integrate communities that are bisected by our transportation systems. I've been so proud to watch my aunt do this work, and the team at the Ray is truly remarkable. It is another great way that we're advancing Ray's legacy.
Well, thank you to you and to your family, John. You are an inspiration and a true Bioneer. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.